very familiar faces for us. So Joe Crothers and John Lamb. And Joe will do the first half on rocks, or a rock, and then John Lamb for the second half on currency. So we're delighted to say thank you to you both.
Okay. Morning, everyone. This talk today, I have to thank Mary Kill for alerting me to this intriguing subject matter, and we'll go through quite a story before we actually get to the topic. But anyway, bear with me. So I've entitled this A Mystery New Rock on the Coast of Cumbria, and one of the things that I realised when I started my research was I had no idea where Cumbria was, because it didn't seem like a familiar name to me. I was aware of Cumberland, but not Cumbria. So for those of you who, like me, don't know where Cumbria is, you can see it's the county that's in the northwest of England, and tucked away in the corner with the Irish Sea as its western side. The reason, I think, for excusing myself for my ignorance, but perhaps for people in the room, the name Cumbria is actually quite a recent name. It was not until 1974, it's as recent as that it became a county. And what happened was not relevant to today's talk, but it was a political decision to chop a bit off several other counties and make a new governing area called Cumbria. So I don't know whether anyone in the room knows the area well or was born in what was, if they were born, anyone in this room would not have been born in Cumbria, but been born in the historic county of Cumberland. Another side issue on this talk is that there's a lot of politics behind the Cumberland issue, and you can see from this slide that there is a move to fight for the historic counties of England. But again, we won't go down that rabbit hole today, except to say that our story is actually 99% sited in Cumberland rather than Cumbria. So, okay. Also in my research, I was looking up some details about a bloke called Henry Bessemer, and for those of you with a engineering background or technical background may well have heard of him. I hadn't, but he's a very interesting person. Again, we're not going to talk about him. I'm just telling you that very, very quick detail that he was an inventor and a very clever man, and plays a part in this story, but behind the scenes. But what delighted me so much was that I found by chance something that he said about Cumberland, beauty on its face and treasure in its heart, and I thought that is the structure of this talk. So I'm going to take you through those two aspects of Cumberland to get to the main story in the end, finally. The beauty of Cumberland is the Lake District, and I think all of you here are very familiar with that. It's one of the most famous now tourist areas of England. In fact, 20 million visitors go there each year. It's as I've got on this slide, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The lakes that we probably know about from our childhood school days are Windermere and Derwent Water, which we'll come to, but a very, very beautiful area that has been a place to visit for centuries. The River Derwent flows from the high mountains of the Lake District out to the Irish Sea, and the Derwent River has got a special place in my heart because I learnt to swim in the Derwent River, not this one though, and grew up on the banks of the Derwent River, and so spent a lot of time in the water. Unfortunately, not this Derwent River, and certainly in a place that was not as picturesque as we're about to explore for the Cumberland Derwent River. There are, in fact, 4 Derwent Rivers in Britain. So you've got to be careful when you stipulate that that you want information as to say exactly which one you mean. I found this map, which also delighted me, because you won't be able to read the detail, I don't think, but it tells where all the market days are and the fairs and so on, as well as giving people a detailed aspect of the county of Cumberland. So we go on to looking at some of the beauty of the area. This is, as it says, one of the biggest water bodies on the Derwent River, and there's just so many picturesque, so many serene and beautiful places that if any of you are interested in looking at the upper reaches of the Derwent, you will find great beauty and ancient towns that have kept their personalities and their certainly their attraction for people, and there is no surprise that 20 million people go to the Lake District for holidays and touring. So again, some beautiful aspects, and as I said, it runs through very ancient areas of England. The Cumberland itself was a very contentious county. The Norse spent a lot of time there and named a lot of places, and those names still exist. There was a lot of internal fighting in the area, as we saw from the map. Scotland above and other mid-counties around, and so it was a very contentious and quite violent history that it has, and yet these kinds of pictures show you the serenity and the beauty of the place. I didn't say, do ask me questions if you have any, and I also didn't check whether you can hear. Can you hear me, Paul? Okay. Okay, is that better? Yep. Right. So, yes.
We're fighting over the microphone. We fight over everything, you know that. Joe, there was a dried off plant, dominant plant on those hillsides. What's that? Is that heather or heath?
Yes, I think it is heather. I did try to find, from that picture, I did try to find out what it was, but someone else here who's been to the Lake District or knows about it? No? But heather and gorse, is it, Mary?
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. No, it adds beauty, but it might... is it considered to be a problem, Mary? No. Ah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So yet again, we're looking at some of the very serene beauty of the Derwent River. This is the ancient market town of Cockermouth, which is on the Derwent River. And it's, I think it's interesting when you look at the streetscape, how much has been preserved. On the map that I showed you, the 1742 map, it says that Cockermouth's market day was on a Monday, and its fair was on the 29th of September, and it is a very well-known market town. And in fact, I did have a little chuckle because I was obviously on Google looking up things, and somebody had asked a question, what is Cockermouth famous for? And the answer was shopping. So here we are in 2006, and yet in 1742 that was what was happening in Cockermouth as well. But it was on a very strategic point of the Derwent River, and so it's not surprising it was a market town. I think the trees in the street have been pruned for winter. I'm assuming that's why they look so strange. Yeah, yes, yeah. And that is not a statue of Wordsworth, I have to say. It's the Earl of Mayo. Surprisingly, Wordsworth's plaque is a very underwhelming aspect of the town. I didn't bother showing you it. It's really quite boring. But we know for sure, though, that he was born there in 17...
Perhaps shoppers aren't poets.
Yes, there's a thing. And the reason why I've brought Wordsworth into it is that there are a number of very famous literary figures who spent a lot of time in the Lake District, and we'll just look at a couple of them today. One of them was Samuel Coleridge, the poet, and I was going to give a few more details about him, but decided not to when I read that he was usually completely out of it from a drug-induced coma. So I thought probably he's not as interesting as I thought he might be. But Wordsworth was interesting, and Hobart High School, 1956, Wordsworth was really quite a figure in my education, and I'm sure a lot of you learnt his poetry. The area of Olesworth in Cumberland was of great interest to Wordsworth. He found it very inspirational and spent a lot of time in the area, and you can see the beauty and how poets would be inspired by all around them, mountains, lakes and beautiful trees. He wandered a lot in this area, and John Glover obviously has depicted something of that Cumberland beauty. In 1847, Wordsworth's daughter died, and he bought this block of land near St Mary's Church. The church is interesting because Wordsworth encouraged the local heiress of the local estate to fund the building of the church. He was the church warden, and this block of land that he bought, or this field as they're called, he intended to build on, but that didn't eventuate, and the field now is famous. It's a great tourist site because most people know about the golden daffodils of Wordsworth's poetry. Can anyone remember the whole poem? Did they learn it at school? It's still in my head. Yes, Mary can. But Wordsworth was, he lived in a number of different places in the Lake District, and he had all kinds of interesting jobs, and one of them was stamp distributor. Who knows what that means, but he didn't always write poetry. Why I'm spending a little bit of time on Wordsworth is to tell you that he wasn't such a pleasant gent. And you'll see from this, he was a snob. And he actually spent quite a lot of time writing to local newspapers and so on about his displeasure in the lower classes invading his Lake District, and accused the railways of deliberately bringing them to this place. So none of this was, do you hear when you learn about Wordsworth's poetry? And but anyway, that's who he was. But a much better, much more likeable and interesting person who is also very famous from the Lake District is this person, Beatrix Potter. You might know her because of her fame in Peter Rabbit and various other books. But in fact, what really intrigued me about her was that she was a sheep farmer. And not only was she a sheep farmer, she was a sheep breeder and a very successful competitor in local shows. Her sheep won all kinds of prizes. People came from all over to get involved in her breeding program. And she was extremely famous, not for her writing, but for her sheep breeding and her farming involvement. And she particularly spent a lot of time in protecting the native sheep to the Lake District called a Herdwick sheep. And she stipulated, she had a lot of property, she bought land, she had managers farm managers on those properties, and she stipulated that the Herdwick sheep should be preserved on the land that she owned. So she was a great entrepreneur, I'd have to say, in the Lake District, and a very notable character there. This is one of her farms, and it was the central business management point for all her land holdings, set in a very beautiful part of Cumberland. I mentioned that she was an entrepreneur. She wrote many, many books, and those of you, probably grandchildren now, are still reading those books. I'm not sure, but they're certainly known across the world. But we all know that children's literature doesn't make money particularly. It's not really one of the best sources of income. But there was something about Beatrix Potter that I think you should know, and that starts with a comparison. And here we have Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse, who was one of the famous first patents of toys that related to his products. In 1928, it was the first patent of a Mickey Mouse toy. Beatrix Potter, in 1903, applied for a patent for Peter Rabbit, and she became the pioneer of merch. If you look at anything now in Disney or anywhere else, Star Wars, all those things, merchandise is everything. It's all set, it's all now patented, it's set up, it's sold with either the book or the film or whatever it is. Beatrix Potter was the very first person to do that, and again, that I thought was a very interesting side of her character. And better still, she made a lot of money from her merchandise, a lot of money. All those books were covered with other copyright and toys with patents, and she gave all of it to the National Trust to preserve the Lake District. So you can see 60 separate properties, 15 farms and 4,000 acres of land. So we now know her probably in the role of the author of Peter Rabbit, but I think the other backstory is much more interesting. I'm going to finish early, so I'll just warn you about that. The other thing about Cumberland is that I mentioned earlier, it was a very historic place. And someone that we all know went there very early, and that was Hadrian. He invaded, the Roman armies invaded Britain 122 AD. Hadrian was very keen to keep his empire intact, and he was not pleased about in other invaders. And when you think about the position of Cumberland, it was open to lots of invasions by different people. There were different tribes. From Scotland, there were other threats around, and so this wall was constructed. It began in 122 on the west coast of Cumberland, and made its way for 80 miles. Now, I thought that it was very interesting that the reflections of Hadrian's thinking and present-day wall building to keep out barbarians. I think there's a political message there somewhere. Hadrian was the first, but we probably know who the latest one was. So just to remind you of the Henry Bessemer quote that Cumberland has beauty on its face and treasure in its heart. We've looked at the beauty on the face of Cumberland, and we'll now explore the treasure in its heart. What was that treasure? It was rich in geological treasures. I say it was. Most have been exhausted, but there were enormous amounts of coal in the north of Cumberland, limestone and hematite along the. Now, if I can be clever and use the limestone and hematite was there, and the coal up in the north. Enormous resources were there, and so this is something that was known in the very, very early history of Cumberland. Coal mining started in 1100 AD, and it was on and off. This county was a long way from markets, any real markets, and so it wasn't a strong industry until the 19th century. And then the realisation of what treasures that Cumberland held became apparent, and it. Just move you on. This is I don't know whether any of you've heard of it. I'd heard of Cumberland coal, but not the famous kidney stone. Are any of you aware of? What about you, coal? Have you? Yeah. It's a sensational bit of hematite, isn't it, with all those, and you can see why it's called kidney stone. It is actually also, this one doesn't show that, but it's also a deep red. The hematite comes as deep red, kidney-coloured mineral. And so here we have treasures, coal, limestone, and iron ore. And what are they used for most? They are the raw materials for steel production. Those three provide the opportunity, and did provide the opportunity, for a very important industry in Cumberland. So we've traced the Derwent River from its upper reaches and its beauty down to its mouth at the Irish Sea, and things start to change now. The town of, the city of Workington is an ancient city, and again, as I said earlier, the Norse inhabited this whole area, and there were small industries set up centuries ago. The word how in Derwent How is Norse for hill, and so those relics of the North invasions are still there, and a lot of other names too. But you can see the Derwent River winds its way down to the sea. And on the southern side of the Derwent was the site for enormous steel mills to be built to make the full use, the economic use of the resources, the treasure of Cumberland. This is one of the steel mills that was built on that southern side of the river. Just a bit of a historical look at the inside of a steel mill, and I was interested that the fellow with his vest on, they all seemed to be very well dressed for such a nasty hot job. So what do we have here? The Workington Steel Works were famous for making railway tracks, and created the steel, and then the tracks were made in huge amounts. And you can see from this slide that it was a global industry. At one point, someone said that they'd made enough railway tracks to go all the way to Istanbul. Don't think that was tested, but it was something said. But so we have a change. We have a change from beauty to pretty horrible surroundings in the steel mill. But we have a rich product that's made that put Cumberland on the map in economic terms, but there's always a downside in that, and this downside was slag. So some of you will most definitely know what slag is, but others may not. So just a quick description of it. It essentially is a byproduct of the steel industry. It's as I said here, it's lighter than the molten iron and comes to the surface and is poured off, and then becomes a rock-like substance. This is where Henry Bessemer, and I'm not going to talk about him very much, but Henry Bessemer invented a process which is known as the Bessemer process, of blowing air into the pig iron, as it's called, or the molten iron, and it just transformed the steel industry in Cumberland. And so that's why his name is still a very famous name in the area. So this is how slag forms. This is what it looks like when it's waste product. I think this is a horrifying slide. It just shows the amount of waste coming from the steel mills, and this is onto the beach at Derwent Howe. It did stop in the 1960s. They changed their processes. Whether it was to do with any kind of environmental concern or not, I don't know. It may have been just simply an economic concern. But the slag was dumped inside the steel mills themselves, and it was pelletised and stored that way. But from the 1870s to 1960s, rubbish got dumped onto the beach at Derwent Howe, and that rubbish was this product slag. You can see from this graph how much Cumbria contributed to steel waste. Enormous amounts were created from those steel mills. And here is something that is probably fairly frightening, that the waste product can still be seen. This is obviously, I've taken this picture from Google Earth, so today you can still see where the slag cliffs exist. So they haven't been worn away, haven't eroded by any means. In April 2025, a paper was written by some geologists from Glasgow University, and it was published in Geology, which is the American Society of Geology and one of the leading geological papers. And if you're going to be doing any research, you would want it to be published in that particular magazine. But the paper was called Evidence for a Rapid Anthropoclastic Rock Cycle, which was quite a mouthful, and for a while didn't sink in. I've just given a little bit of a description of from anthropology and other words we know, meaning human, and clastic, obviously broken. But the title itself was fairly alarming. But it suddenly took the scientific world by storm, and many articles were written. The BBC did programs on this particular, what the Glasgow geologists had found. It caused quite a stir, and in fact Mary read The New Scientist in July 2025 and gave me this article, the one in the bottom, and that was the prompt for me to think there's a story behind that. It certainly, even now, if you go onto the internet, you can see that people are still talking about this particular geological piece of research. So what did the geologists find in Do and How? Everyone had a chance to read those. So really quite a simple thing: erosion, reworking, and then cementing back onshore into something that was very much, and you can see from this, very much a cover of it. Actually, at the base of these slag cliffs, it was beach originally, and so this rock is coming back onto a beach and forming there. So the geologists concluded that the rock was a conglomerate-like sedimentary rock. And I've just put a little description of conglomerate for those who are not utterly familiar. It forms on beaches and riverbeds, and you can see whether the rocks in conglomerate are smooth and rounded. It's also rock that you find in glaciers, because the glaciers obviously can roll rocks for a long time and create conglomerate as a process. So what does the new rock, how does it compare with that description? You can see that it's very, very consistent with the description of conglomerate, along with the cementing together. And from that picture you can also see the spread of the rock. It's not that there's just one or two cobbles or boulders. You can see that it's got quite a long stretch. So as with all anything that's to do with geology, and as I mentioned at the launch, the collective noun for a geologist is an argument. And so the question obviously arose, is it a rock? And there has been quite some further debate on this, and I've just given you a very concise basis of the debate with the battle line marked. So I want you to look at those definitions and see which ones you think are fair enough. Anyone got an opinion? Is it a rock? According to those, well, the argument against being a rock comes in two words in the bottom, two things, and those two words are naturally occurring. And the argument is that slag is not natural, and therefore, even though everything else seems to indicate that it's a conglomerate rock, because it has that 83% slag in its composition, it doesn't cut the mustard, as Danny would say. Yes, Marita.
No, in the first one, the loudness doesn't matter. Doesn't the sound goes through?
Even in the first sentence, it says, or other natural feature, and it's not a natural feature. Well, is it?
Well, that's one of the arguments, yes. Anyone else got an opinion? No, it's...
Well, the rest of it, it's naturally occurring.
Yes. Ian.
Question, Joe. What's the predominant element? Is it still iron? Is the predominant element still iron?
Yes. There's 83% slag, and so you've got those iron minerals in there. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment? Yes, Cole.
Just a little bit of added information about iron and steel-making slag. They actually have quite useful properties in cement and
Get to that.
in building. Oh, you're getting to that.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
No.
No.
I'm glad that I'm glad.
But just in regards to the last question. There's not a lot of iron left in the slag. I mean, the business of the blast furnace is to take the iron out of the slag.
Yes, I suppose that's... Yeah.
So it's more like aluminium silicates. There's still a fair bit of iron in it, but it's predominantly aluminium silicates.
Yeah. Thanks, Cole. Okay. And yet another argument, of course, we can rely on geologists to provide some contention. The other argument is the term anthropoclastic a valid one? And this argument is raised because of the, and I'll just go into it again, most of you are aware of the long-term debate that's going on about recognising a new epoch. This has been proposed for a number of reasons, that human activity has created geological, has affected geology and ecosystems, and should be recognised, the human activity should be recognised in terms of a changing world. And that debate's gone on for a long time, but you can see from this, it's only just recently been denied by the International Union of Geological Sciences. One of the reasons why it's been rejected was because there's no agreement on when that, in fact I'll go back, you can see from this slide there is some fairly firm dates about when at the start of any one of these epochs that are mentioned, but there's a lot of argument about when the start of the proposed Anthropocene. So it was rejected, and it can't be that decision can't be appealed against. But that didn't mean the arguments have gone away, and it remains a very contentious issue. And the one of the reasons is this, that there's an enormous amount of steel slag waste around the globe, it's certainly a global issue, if not a global problem. And the geologists, the University of Glasgow geologists, argue that the whole debate hasn't gone away, because they believe that the human-made rocks that do and how are changing the coastline and affecting marine ecosystems, and so they believe that this is evidence of human activity that is changing the geological face of the world. And there's more arguments, more evidence that can be found too very easily. One of the most well-known ones is plastiglomerates. These are horrible names, aren't they? But I really thought that this book had a wonderful title, Mongrels of Our Making, because bit by bit, this is what's happening. There's evidence in Spain, there's evidence in Soviet Union, all around the world. There's signs that human activity are either creating new rocks or changing in some way what has been the past. So this debate about epochs will continue. But there's a bright spot, and steel slag waste, it certainly can, as Cole's mentioned, contribute to our circular economy in more ways than one. So two things that come out of two waste products that come from steel production. One is the slag, but carbon dioxide also is a byproduct, and that can be carbonised and permanently stored. So that's one advance in this scientific development of waste, legacy waste. It can be used for concrete and roadworks and some brick making. There's uses for that material. There has been some involvement in agriculture with waste, slag waste, but the concern there is the toxicity. There's not enough confidence yet that that's going to be an area that can develop further. But there's three key elements that do have another life, and you can see from that nickel is taken from steel slag, chromium, and vanadium. Say it for me. Vanadium. It's certainly not the huge problem that it seemed to be, but it's a slow and steady progress in finding out how this awful waste and this desecration of our shorelines can be made into something that is helpful for us in the future. So I'm about to finish. So finally, to sum up, the Cumberland iron ore and limestone that made the steel, that made the railway tracks, that made the slag, that made the new rocks, those three natural products are immortalised in this installation. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what it is? It's in the Workington Public Square, and it's to celebrate another life, another time. It's to celebrate history. It's an installation made of railway track offcuts. And essentially that's all that remains of those enormous steel mills, and not all that remains of the slag cliffs as we've seen, but a reminder to Workington that once they had a history of steel making and were global champions of railway tracks. So that's the end. A couple of questions. Any question? Yes?
Joe, for the geologists or people in the world of geology who don't call them rocks, what do they call them?
I don't know, Sonia. That's an interesting question. Don't know. Just argue that they're not rocks is all I have read in my research, yeah. Yes, waste product, yes. Yeah.
It's not a question, it's rather a statement. From my visit to the Lake District, I was struck by how similar to our Tasmanian mountains were the mountains in the Lake District. The only problem was the green was the wrong colour.
Yes. Yes. Anyone else got a comment or a question? Jen. Reese gets her 10,000 steps. Yes.
It's not really a question. I'm just wondering if they're finding a use for slag, why don't they block it, like pour it into blocks and preserve them, and meanwhile use them as fences or something like that
Yes.
until they find a use for it, rather than letting it ruin the coastline.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I'm sure, I don't know the answer to that, Jen, but I'm sure there probably is some of that done. It's just that, if you think back to that, the graph of Cumbria and the enormous amount, the enormous volumes of slag just in one county, and think of that as globally, there is so much waste that it probably maybe is something people are doing, but would make very little difference. And also, I guess you'd have to have the space to be able to do those kinds of things, to reuse it somewhere else. Kathy?
You did say that they were starting to make it into pellets. So
Yes.
those pellets must have been stored somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I couldn't find any evidence of where those pellets went, whether they were used for something else. But obviously, there would be some way of getting rid of them.
You kind of wonder, Australia being such a huge manufacturer of iron ore, coal, all of that sort of stuff. Still, I grew up in Port Kembla, near Port Kembla, which is a big steel-making town, the same as Newcastle. So they obviously had the same waste.
Yeah.
I wonder whatever happened to it.
Yes, well, certainly that's something that, and we know with Savage River that we have a pelletised system being sold offshore. I know that's not the slag, but there's means of doing something valuable and moving it elsewhere, but don't know about those cities at all. But there must have been an enormous amount of slag coming from Newcastle, and yeah. Yes.
Uncle.
Jog.
People asking questions should have to run and get them.
Yes.
Yeah. My personal experience is with slag, steel, and iron making slag. They're actually quite two different things with different properties. But my experience is in Newcastle and Port Kembla, where I worked building things out of slag, and it is a very useful product.
What kind of things did you build, Cole?
Roads,
Yeah.
and landfills. One particular project I was involved in was the ground treatment for the shores of Port Kembla, where they were constructing the oil rig platforms for Bass Strait, and the project was to construct what they called the concrete gravity structures, which was the base of the platforms, and the superstructure of the platforms was being built in Newcastle and was being barged down to be then craned onto the base, which was the gravity structure. And that's all by the by. But the problem was that the superstructure was so heavy, they had to bring these big cranes in, these big Lapson cranes from that were imported and hired for the job, and they came in bits, and they were from Oregon in the United States. But they had to be assembled on the side of Port Kembla, and then they would be then used to reach out over the Port Kembla harbour to lift the superstructure onto the gravity structures that were being built. The problem was that they each weighed hundreds of tonnes, and they hadn't thought about the ground that they were going to sit the cranes on. And
Is this a bit like the wharf at Devonport? Something.
Probably. I don't know much about the wharf at Devonport, but they worked out that when geotech engineers were finally consulted on this, they worked out that cranes would sink at about the same rate that they tried to lift the structures, which wasn't going to be very helpful. So they actually employed me to go down and build some platforms for them, and the main ingredient for those platforms was iron-making slag. And it is a very useful material because it gets very strong. It's got a self-cementing property called pozzolanic property, which creates a great rock. Getting back to that debate about what is a rock. But basically I built a rock platform out of slag. And
that's...
functioned very well. They sat their cranes on it and lifted these big heavy structures.
That's a really lovely way to finish off at bringing a rock structure made of slag out of the mystery rock at Cumbria. So, and tease up. So thank you, Cole. That was a good segue into morning tea.
Thank you.